What is the greatest piece of music ever written? Well, if you said Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, you'll get no argument here. But how to describe a documentary about the Ninth, which includes Russia's immoral war against Ukraine, Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel a year ago, and the cartoonist who created Charlie Brown? Complicated? You bet. So here are the director, writer, and narrator, Larry Weinstein, and one of the producers, Liam Romalis, to talk about Beethoven's Nine, Ode to Humanity, which I have to say is a sensational documentary. I've seen it twice already, and I'm going to see it again. So first of all, welcome you two.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And let's play a little clip from the documentary so we can tell everybody what this thing's about. Sheldon, if you would, roll it.
This is a film in which we set out to feature 9 subjects who somehow embody Beethoven, his Ninth Symphony, and the ideals that inspired him. What resulted is not the film that I had expected to make.
Tell us more. What kind of movie did you set out to make?
We had been commissioned by, primarily by Arte, the cultural station in Germany, to make a film to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And so we were thinking about different aspects of that. In truth, I wasn't sure I even wanted to do it because I had already made a film about Beethoven. But then we were thinking, what if we talk about the ideals of the Enlightenment that inspired Beethoven? Why don't we come up with some ideas of people who kind of overlap with those ideals? And what if we approached the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, made up of refugees from Ukraine that formed just after that war broke out, that terrible war, and founded by and conducted by Carrie Lynn Wilson, who is from Winnipeg, but who has a Ukrainian family. What if we, and it was built on the ideals of humanism and of freedom and peace, and which is what inspired Beethoven. So what if we try to combine all these ingredients as well as find other people and
essentially 9 people and how the Ninth affected them.
Yes, it's sort of like Ocean's 11. The idea, it's not called Beethoven's Ninth, it's called Beethoven's Nine.
Exactly. That's not quite what happened. And
Well,
you set out to make.
that isn't quite what happened, but I do want to say that when Larry approached me and my partner Jason about this film, it was, he said, I'm really not sure I want to make this film, and we have basically less than a year. So we had, for a feature-length documentary, that's an incredibly short amount of time. So the challenge, of course, is you have to move very quickly. All of the pieces have to fall into place. You have to start reaching out to people. And it was very clear that we didn't want to do a traditional music doc because there's no sense in that. There have been countless docs made about Beethoven's Ninth, analyzing each movement. We wanted to do something that was about the here and now, something that, although this is a piece that's 200 years old, it's unbelievable that we're still listening to it and it's still as ubiquitous as ever. We really wanted to comment about the world we live in today.
And it was the first major symphony in which people sang. And there are so many extraordinary moments in your film, Larry, but none more so than when Beethoven's Ninth, the Ode to Joy, is sung in Ukrainian.
Yes.
Not in the original German, but in Ukrainian, and they changed some of the words. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Carrie Lynn thought, she was inspired by the fact that when Schiller first wrote the poem, which inspired Beethoven when he was 15 years old, and Beethoven always knew that he wanted to set it to music, but didn't until the end of his life. But it was Ode to Joy that he had written. And then Leonard Bernstein performed it in 1989 with the Berlin Wall coming down, and he changed it to Ode to Freedom, which is apparently what Schiller first wanted to call it. And that inspired Carrie Lynn to go Ode to Glory?
Ode to Glory.
Glory, because Slava is sort of the thing that they talk about all the time.
Slava Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she wanted, and then it occurred to her, okay, because she got all these forces together. I had approached her to do this piece of music, and I was sure they would say no, because you don't just get a full orchestra, a full choir, and soloists together in this little amount of time we had. But she decided to do this in Poland and was given a Polish choir, and so 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the performance, she thought, let's do it in Ukrainian. It will have so much more meaning. But the poor Polish choir had to learn Ukrainian.
Which they did brilliantly. And here, we got a statement here from Carrie Lynn Wilson. Sheldon, let's bring this up. She writes, as Ukraine continues its fight on behalf of the free world, it needs our support more than ever, and we will proudly take our message across Europe and the United States in an expression of love for Ukraine and our steadfastness in our resistance to tyranny. They are... This is like an all-star band, right, Liam? They've just sort of brought the band together, and they are out there making their music and making their message, aren't they?
They are what really made this film, I think, possible. When you reached out to Carrie Lynn Wilson, and she said, and you fully expected her to say, forget it. Yeah. No, there's no way we're going to perform the 9th. We can't pull it off. When she said, no, we'd love to do the 9th, and we'd love to do it in Warsaw with the Polish National Opera. It really, it felt like the film had the momentum out of the blocks that it needed. One
of the other 9 you feature is a guy named Steven Pinker, whom Canadians will know because he's one of us. Now, of course, a Harvard professor, author of Enlightenment Now. And as you were including him in the documentary, I wonder if you had a moment where you thought his book is about enlightenment now, and he's suggesting that now is the best time in human history to be born in.
Yes.
But we feel like a million miles away from enlightenment right now, don't we?
Yeah, it's really hard to reconcile this, that we live in the best of all possible worlds, the best of all possible times, and which is kind of the thesis of his book. And he has very convincing evidence that it is, and that these other things that are terrible are kind of blips. And that in the trends of the world, that we have more education, we have more wealth, we have actually more compassion. In many ways, the environment crisis is something that we actually deal with, unlike the past. In many ways, and the birth rates and all these things are much, much better than they have ever been. And yet, yes, it feels like things are very bleak.
I got to confess, I've never heard of Monika Brodka. Then again, I'm not quite her target demographic. She's the Beethoven of Polish rock, you tell us, 36 years old, and a real, that's not even alternative rock. What would you call what she does?
Well, she is a bona fide Polish pop star. Right. She's a rock star, pop star.
Punk star.
Punk star. She commands audiences of thousands and thousands of people.
Had she heard of Beethoven's 9th before this?
She has. However, I think that the role of Monika Brodka, or Brodka as she likes to be known, was to sort of experience the 9th through her eyes. She was the person perhaps least familiar with the 9th, and that's why when there's a wonderful scene when she comes to the concert hall where the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra and Carrie Lynn Wilson are rehearsing, we're really getting a sense of her, of this monumental symphony washing over her. In some ways for the first time. Of course, she talks about the Ode to Joy. She says, if you stop 10 people on the street, 9 of them will certainly know the Ode to Joy.
Yeah.
But there's another reason why I think we were attracted to her. We found out in the process of, I have to admit, I don't love the melody of the Ode to Joy. It seems really banal.
What?
No,
that's heretical to say.
On TV, you have to.
This moment of heresy brought to you by Larry Weinstein. Okay.
Well, I think first-year piano students, when they're little kids, all play Ode to Joy. I remember playing on the piano Ode to Joy and then quitting piano. And a lot, and it's just a really common thing. But I was talking to a musicologist, a Beethoven musicologist, and they said, "Don't you realize what he was doing? He was trying to create a folk song, something that sounded like it was hundreds of years old, primal, that anyone can sing, accessible." And then when we found out that Monika Brodka had grown up in the Polish mountains as a folk musician, and her father intended her to be part of that tradition. She can't shake that folk thing. It's like when she heard the Ode to Joy, she got it. Mm-hmm. She got it. And not to mention that she's in Poland, which is right next to Ukraine.
Indeed.
I mean, next
to Russia.
To Russia, yeah.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier in our conversation as it relates to Leonard Bernstein and his conducting of Beethoven's Ninth as the Berlin Wall was coming down, Christmas 1989. That's right. We have younger people watching us right now who will have no firsthand memory of this. So put them in that time. What was the significance of that concert at that moment?
Well, you know, this was at the end of the horrible Cold War. It was a leftover from World War II when communists and the capitalists and the different countries were fighting, and Germany had been divided to East and West Germany. Berlin was East and West Berlin, and there was this wall that was erected in 1961. It was a traumatic thing. It divided families. It divided friends, and it was just a very awful political act. And then in '89, that wall came down and it represented the unifying and a better world, maybe we're now looking forward. And Bernstein was so moved by that he said, I want to conduct Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in Berlin. I'm going to do it in the East Berlin and West Berlin. And it was a very meaningful thing. And he knew he only had a few months to live, but he was determined to use every ounce of strength that he could.
Here's how you captured it in Beethoven's Nine. Sheldon, if you would.
My parents asked me whether we want to go to the wall and to chop some pieces out. So I took my ski goggles, which I bought a couple of years ago in Czechoslovakia, and we went to the wall and started chopping pieces out of the wall, as we did a couple of days before. And suddenly there was a lady staying next to us and saying, look, there's a guy coming that looks like Leonard Bernstein. And Bernstein was coming and said, I am Leonard Bernstein.
And there's Franz as a little guy. How did you find him? How did you find the guy in that picture?
Well, it's a great story. And I said, I don't want to have this in the film unless we find Franz. But because it is the 200th anniversary of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Beethoven Museum in Bonn, Germany, the birthplace of Beethoven, they had kind of been in contact with him, and they were going to display the hammer and chisel that Bernstein used in a big glass case. So through them, we found him. But I was warned, he's never been interviewed. He's going to be very shy. He doesn't want to talk, and he was effusive.
He was.
Yeah, it was really he was a delightful surprise, and in a full circle moment, Beethoven's Nine premiered at Beethoven House in Bonn alongside the Hammer and Chisel this past May. So it really felt like, very organic.
And Franz was there with his father, who brought him to the wall. And I was just staring. It's like, I'll not look at the film. I want to watch them. And they were glowing. And the other person who was there was the daughter of Leonard Bernstein, Jamie Bernstein, who was just so moved and so... Yeah, it was nice.
Larry, I have to make a very hard turn here.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about something that was very unanticipated when you started to make your movie.
Yeah.
And that came right home to you. Mm-hmm. Your sister, your brother-in-law were in Israel on October 7th of last year. And they lived in a kibbutz near Gaza. And they were directly involved, let's put it that way, in all of the events of that day. How and why did you decide to put all that in your movie?
I didn't decide to do that. I have made a lot of films in my life. I had never been in one of my films. I never narrated a film, except for one other film. That's a TV Ontario film on propaganda. But I just, at one point, because I'd been filming the Ukrainian orchestra members, talking to them about war and trauma, the cameraman that I've worked with for many years, John Min Tran, was walking with me and he said, Larry, I have this idea and you're going to hate it. I need to turn the camera on you. and I'm getting emotional. And I'm going to call Liam and Jason at Riddle Films and your German producers at 3B and find out, get them to submit questions to you. And tomorrow morning, we're going to do an interview. And you're going to be on the film, and you're going to talk about it. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do this. I was in such denial. Let's just keep making the film that we were going to make. That's what I was referring to at the beginning. And so finally I said, yeah, I have to.
You did. You made the right decision.
Yes. So he ended up following me, and then he said, right after we finished the interview, it was such a sigh of relief, and he said, what are you doing now? And I said, oh, I'm going to go and visit my mother. I need to be with her. And he said, I'm going to follow you. So he just kept following me, and then my daughter. And
yes, she was in it too. Yeah. Now, there's a moment in the movie, you're obviously after the 7th of October, your sister and her husband go missing, and you don't know where they are.
Yeah.
And you end up getting Melanie Jolie, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, on the phone.
Yes.
And she's assuring you that what she's about to tell you ought to be off the record and not for publication.
Oh, right, she did say that.
She did, and you guys are rolling on it, and it's in the movie.
Yeah.
Did you get any satisfaction out of that phone call with her?
It wasn't just the phone. Well, she told us some information we didn't know.
Right.
We didn't know that that it wasn't all the hostages weren't in one place. They were in different places.
And we're not all taken by the same group.
Yeah. I subsequently, my daughter Allie and I were in Ottawa and had meetings with her, and she was really very sympathetic, but also she assured us of what Canada was trying to do at the in Qatar, and anyway, we really felt better having spoken with her, but we knew it was hopeless. We knew information right away that looked bad, but I think we were kind of admonished. I had to deal with Israeli IDF and intelligence, and I felt almost admonished, as many of us in my family, for losing hope. And hope can be difficult if you think that it's hopeless.
Let me do one more follow-up on this. Your daughter wanted Minister Jolie to denounce Israel. Your daughter wanted the minister to publicly, your Jewish daughter, I should add, wanted the minister to denounce Israel. Have you had any blowback from the Jewish community on that?
Surprisingly little. I had said something similar being interviewed by this station called CBC, sorry.
I've heard of it.
And I was accused of being a self-hating Jew. And it's like, no, I don't hate myself. I hate people like Netanyahu. So no, there was some blowback originally. And some of the people who were resistant have come to me and said, you know what? I believe what Ali was saying back then. I think that she was right. The thing is, that was only 3 weeks after October 7th that she said those things. And it was very strong of her. And Ali was very, very emotional. And in a weird way, afterwards, Leonard Bernstein kind of answers her well about having to be humane, having to be, anyway, yeah.
Gotcha.
It's very emotional, obviously, to talk about, and it involved a lot of people.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Liam, I wonder if after having made this picture, at some point, I presume you asked yourself, how in heaven's name did Beethoven compose this potentially most beautiful piece of music ever composed in world history, and he was completely deaf at the time? How did he do it? Did you come to any conclusions on that?
You know, it's a great question. I have very few conclusions and just more admiration, I think, than anything else. The fact is that Beethoven, and we touch on this in the film, Beethoven was getting very near the end of his life. He was completely deaf. He was in pain. He was suffering. He had withdrawn from society. And the fact that he could find it in himself to create, to compose this work of art that is a plea for connectedness, for unity, for breaking down barriers between people. it's just an extraordinary feat. And it's one that I think that we really try and explore through all of the different characters and subjects in this film. I mean, this film, I believe, it truly is, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Did you ever come to a conclusion about that? How does a guy who can't hear a thing create something so gorgeous?
You know, I sometimes think about his deafness, and people talk about it's like the greatest tragedy of classical music and classical composers. And I think, well, you know, except the musicians were very limited back then. And in a way, did his deafness help him write music that was unfettered? Was it like the fact that he was completely deaf and that he could just write beautiful things, and he was insecure about it. He was insecure about the use of words, like I said. But at the end, he accepted it. And I was just reading a quote of his today where he basically said, "I can now die. I've done this work. I'm ready to end." But I'm glad he didn't, because he wrote a lot of great string quartets afterwards.
In our last few minutes here, let's touch on this, the message of the ninth, the ultimate message. Alle Menschen werden Brüder. All men will be brothers someday. Having made the movie, Liam, start us off. How does that prognostication hit you now?
You know, it feels in the time we're living in that it's something that is pretty out of reach in many ways. However, I believe that this is something that we have to strive for continually. And all of us and all of the characters in our film, in their own way, are fighting against the pessimism, fighting against the darkness. Foremost among the stories is Larry, who, despite the awful, tragic circumstances that are documented in the film, you find a way to reach towards the light out of the darkness.
Did you, Larry?
I can't stand the dehumanization of people and the dehumanization of both sides. And for instance, in the Israel-Hamas thing, same in Ukraine and Russia. I believe in humanity. I feel like Beethoven's belief was inspirational to me. Beethoven wanted to set this beautiful poem. He waited to the end when he was deaf and he was in pain. And not just that, society had closed down. The aristocracy was increasingly rich, and there was more divide. The politicians were increasingly sociopathic and narcissistic in his own life. And also religion. There was the Restoration was becoming more closed and more. It was all anti-Enlightenment, and he wanted to write a love letter to humanity, and I think he wanted to write a love letter to us, to the future. Like, this is what we have to strive for in the face of darkness, and I think that we have to learn from that.
I want everybody to see this movie. And so I'm going to just spend a minute here telling people how they can do that. Because it was on, I think we played it on TVO last night in prime time. It's on YouTube. So look for Beethoven's 9 on YouTube. You'll find it there. And then there is a special screening at the Royal Conservatory of Music's Kerner Hall, downtown Toronto, on the 19th of November. November 19. I think I'm emceeing that.
Oh.
Yeah. They're going to have a special screening. Gustavo Jimeno from the TSO is going to be there.
That's right.
And they're going to play some music afterwards.
That's right.
And it's going to be a night. It's going to be a night.
Yeah.
Is this your best movie? I think this is your best movie. I've seen almost all your movies. I think this is your best one.
You know, it's funny. Towards the end of the film, Sarah Pauli saw it, and she said, "This is the film that you're going to be remembered for." And I went, "What about the other 40 films? Are they chopped liver?" but
They're not chopped liver, but this is the best. My opinion, for what it's worth.
Will they say your last film is, whatever they say?
Only as good as your last.
Yeah, it was good.
Well, if you're only as good as your last film, then you're pretty darn good, because this was great.
Thank you.
Liam Romalis, founder, Riddle Films, producer of Beethoven's 9, Ode to Humanity. Larry Weinstein, Canadian, documentarian, director, writer, narrator. Beethoven's 9, Ode to Humanity. Don't walk to see it. Run to see it. Run to see it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Steve.
you.